want to read to you the verse that inspired the end of the poem. You all know the poem is Jacob fleeing from Beersheba, from the land of Canaan, on his way to Padan Aram to escape his brother's wrath. He finds a place, he goes to sleep, and he has the dream of the ladder with the angels coming up and down. And it says in verse 16, ויקץ יעקב משנתו ויאמר אכן יש אדוני במקום הזה ואנוכי לא ידעתי. Jacob woke from his sleep and he said, behold, there is Adonai in this place, and I didn't know. And the Hasidic tradition, as you can probably predict, loves to teach. Um, we're spiritually asleep. We wake up and we say, there's Adonai in this place, meaning within. And I didn't know, meaning I forgot that life is an altar in which we are serving the divine. So thank you for that wonderful poem. As I'm thinking about some things we want to share both on what's happening in Israel and our experiences. So yesterday, Mirav and I finished our shopping at the nearby Shuk Levinsky, which is a big cultural attraction here in Tel Aviv. It's a very small shuk, market of stalls and people eating. There's picnic benches throughout because during Corona, people blocked it off. You couldn't go inside restaurants, so the benches went out and the picnic benches stayed. Outdoor restaurants, in many ways, stayed outdoor restaurants. These little, tiny little restaurants became big. There's tables flowing out into the street, which is blocked off. So we sit down, and the benches are pretty tight. So strangers sit right next to and across from each other. And I'm chatting with Mirav, and about a 14-year-old girl across from me looks at me, and I can tell she's very, very tentative. She finally says to me, "Your English is very good." And I said, "Well, I've been studying English for 70 years." And she said, "Really?" So I said, "Well, I'm an American." And she said, "Oh, wow." And I inquired of her, and she's learning. She says, "I understand, אני מבינה, אבל אני לא יכול לדבר." I understand, but I can't speak. I thought to myself, well, we'll see about that. So I engaged in a conversation with her just to draw her out. There's a way of thinking language. You ask a question, you give a few words, and you coax the language out of them. I've had people do it for me. I was doing it for her. Had a really nice time, and Miral says, you're speaking English. Have you noticed that? And she's like, I'm speaking English. Anyway, so we went from that over to the Torah portion. I thought what she loves to do, and she's began meeting with a rabbi studying Torah. We come to the Torah portion, and here we are in Shuk Levinsky, random family. She's with her two cousins, their parents, her parents, and 14 years old, and right into this Torah portion. And I thought to myself, wow, how great is this? Strangers in the street. What do we talk about? Parshat HaShavua. So that's really a wonderful thing. Another thing, I was at a language exchange. I'm just giving you some cultural insights to Israel. I hope this is okay with you. And the language exchange is there's a hostel nearby with a huge meeting room, and they have different tables with what's happening at the table. Intermediate English, advanced English, beginner English. Same with Spanish, Russian, German, French, Italian. It's a huge room, and when you sign up, you can either be what's called an ambassador, a shagrir, for your language, or just sit and learn. So I went to the Spanish table, trying to get my Spanish back. I have a German tutor, so I'm going to get my German back now that I am call it on my sabbatical before I really get back to work. And so I sat down so I finished my learner, and then I went to be the ambassador at the advanced Hebrew table. I sat down, and I say, so who are you and who are you? And the people right next to me were a guy who has a master's in philosophy, not sure if he wants to go back to his doctorate, and a young woman beginning philosophy. And there's a third guy, and I said, would you mind if we discuss philosophy? And so I'm again coaxing each of them. He's a okay Frankfurt School, very critical of postmodernism. He said, "Why are all the professors postmodernists?" I said, I have an answer. Would you like to hear it?" And young woman just beginning the study of Socrates, just got out of the army. And we had such a deep conversation. And the third guy, who's not a philosopher, was listening in, really, really interested. And finally, another fellow joined us about 15 minutes afterwards. And I said, "So what do you do?" He said, "Well, I just got out of the reserves." "What did you do in the reserves?" "Truck driver." "What's your profession?" "Truck driver." He says, "What, I don't, is this where we're going to talk about philosophy?" I said, "We have two people who study it. One guy said yes, and you came late. So yes, this is this table for now. We're not going to discuss getting up in the morning or driving your car. We're going to discuss the world of ideas." He said, "I don't see any use for it." I said, "Okay." I said, "Here's what I said." I said, "Well, uh, are you a father?" He says, I will be." I said, "Okay. Um, what will you raise your children toward?" He said, "Well, I'm going to take care of them. I'll protect them. I'll provide for them." I said, Great. That's what you're going to do. What do you want them to become?" He said, "Haven't thought about that." I said, "Well, philosophy is reflecting on things that matter. So when you get there, you have an idea of what you ought to be doing. So if you know what you want your child to become, it gives you an idea of how to raise your child." And he says, like what?" I said, "Well, integrity, resilience, those are good vocabulary words." And he says, "Okay, I like philosophy. I'm in." Like, let's talk about this some more. So, and the Frankfurt School guy, he says, "What's the big interest that life has no meaning and nothing has any purpose and it's all just subjective?" I said, "Well," so we began to talk, and he said, "Can we meet?" I said, "Absolutely, we can meet." And the young woman on the side, I'm coaxing Socrates out of her, and she finally said, "Anything you teach, I want to attend." I said, "Well, give me your phone number because we're getting a group together and I'll be launching soon." So I've decided in January, when I want to start teaching in Israel, I'm going to be teaching, and it will be on Instagram. I'll record it. You guys can all see it. It's going to be called I've decided to teach in English, but so that advanced Hebrew speakers can come, enrich vocabulary, and participate in a meaningful discussion. I'm going to call it uh, "The Search for Meaning from Philosophy, Psychology, Religion, and Literature." That's pretty open, and let the whole world know about it and see who shows up. So we'll advertise it on my Facebook page and Instagram, of course, all of you. And you're up, and I've decided we're starting in January. So I finally feel set in something that I can offer here, and that's of course one of our our big purposes here is big or small, one person or a few. We just want to help make a contribution to Israeli society, which is why I taught at the language exchange. But they said to me, "Why'd you make Aliyah?" I said, "Well, a few reasons. And one is contribute in any way that we can." And they said, "Well, you really added to us." And Mirav went to another, went to an advanced English, uh, yeah, to an advanced Hebrew learners and to help them. And I came, and they're all sitting around looking and saying, "Don't go, don't go." So I could tell she was having a wonderful, wonderful impression upon them. And Mirav said, "Well, this is just great." I said, "Yeah, you get here, you can learn, you can contribute." So I don't know anywhere else that does that. They don't do that in LA, where there's a huge auditorium, 200 people, tables of every local, language, and Rob and I walked out. We said, "Wow, this is so amazing." Partly because it's Tel Aviv, because we have so many foreigners, et cetera, students coming in, so many immigrants. Anyway, on the other note, I want to share with you what's happening in Syria. First of all, well, however you feel about the election, Israelis are 80% jubilant about Trump becoming president. There is a real fear that, again, I'm not judging it. It might be the best policy for America, it might not be the best policy for America. But Israel was really worried that Kamala Harris was not deeply dedicated to the strength of Israel, that the Middle East was a problem to manage. And maybe that should be the approach of the president of the US, but not a deep conviction that Israel must not only survive, but not feel that Israel's survival is at stake. And again, this is not a judgment on whether Trump should be president. I'm just saying in Israel, all the way over, I would say to the, I mean, certainly on the Israeli political left, there's a certain group that dislikes Trump as much as the American left dislikes Trump. But I would say all the way over to 80% of Israelis, from what I can determine, there's a sense of relief that America has Israel's back. So that's one thing that's going on here. Of course, Israel being able to fight off the Iranian ballistic missile attack, and great trepidation of going into Lebanon that had to go in because they were shooting thousands of rockets over continuously, and the north was depopulated. That's just it could not live. But sending the army in, the ground troops in, was scary because in 2006 it turned into kind of a fiasco. Well, it was a brilliant, brilliant run operation. Integration of forces. The troops did superbly there. And of course, Hezbollah signed a ceasefire, which is a way of saying that we're surrendering. Israel does not need to conquer Lebanon, just needs to get Hezbollah across, away from the border. Well, no one expected this. Hezbollah had been Assad's militia on call. And when Hezbollah could no longer fight, the enemies of Assad up in northern Syria realized this is their time because he could not call on Hezbollah to defend. I guess he needed Hezbollah to strengthen his own forces. Well, they came down. We're ambivalent about them because they are Islamists. They say, "Well, we used to like Al Qaeda and ISIS. We don't anymore." We're all thinking, "We hope," um, but they're conquering. They've conquered part of northern Syria. They've apparently gotten down, within rocket distance of Israel, at least some of them. And everyone's astonishment, Syria might be on the brink of collapse. Iran is not able to help. So Iran has been exposed as that it can't really hurt Israel, and it can't really support Hezbollah, and is not supporting Assad. And here the feeling of, did the world just shift? Is it, is something else going to happen? Because it's a very strange feeling that something dramatic is afoot. Now it could be that everything will just go back to usual. Um, but in Israel regaining its confidence in its security, military security services, receiving the sense of unconditional support and profound support from the United States, watching an intractable enemy in Assad begin to dissolve, seeing Hezbollah cross from the border. There's almost Hamas, even though they're still holding 100 hostages, they are completely defanged. We don't know what's going to happen there, but that part of the war is over. What's left is, of course, is to get Hamas to surrender, and more importantly, get the hostages home. So there's a sense of wonder here now, but Israelis are addicted to arguing. I just want to tell you that. I mean, if so the as we watch the news, they're still angry at each other. When I say to me, Rob, you got to turn the news off. They're just no matter what. Someone starts to talk, somebody has to say, somebody attacks them, and seven people are suddenly screaming at each other. I say, I just want to hear the news. I don't want to hear seven people screaming about the news. But Mirav said, look, it's Israel. That's the way they study the news here. I said, okay, so I'm good with that. Anyway, so much more to share with you. I'll share with you one last thing. So my new friend from the language exchange. So we decided we're going to meet, and I said, how about Thursday evening? He said, Wednesday evening. Wednesday evening. Next time I'll tell you about Douglas Murray. We went and heard Douglas Murray. If you don't know who he is, look him up. I'll give you a report on Douglas Murray's uh, uh, um, giving speeches in Israel. It was like a revival meet. Well, let me tell you about it now. He's a great Israel supporter. He's not Jewish, British journalist, and he goes around the world making Israel's case. He comes out, and there was about a 5-minute standing ovation for Douglas Murray. And when he's done, same thing. And we we looked around the room, and and he said, "This is the only place in the world where I'm loved this much." And people said, we love you," because he's decided to fight for Israel. And he says, I feel I'm with my family here, and you know, you're out there fighting for us. And it was just this moment of rapture. And then you look around the room, and an entire room filled with love for Douglas Murray, and he's loving Israelis, and it's a love fest, and he had a good message. But it was a really incredible experience. So I asked my new friend if he wanted to meet on Thursday night. He said no. He's going to his books. His friends wrote a book. Well, his friend wrote a book called, in Hebrew, "Optimism as a Spiritual, as a Moral Choice." Otomiyut ke musari. And he lost his brother. He's telling his story. He lost his brother. He's of that age where men were called up, in many in the special units, suffered the most. And then he had four of his friends um, write about it. And a woman got up, and one woman said, reviewed Jewish history very briefly within 5 minutes, and what each group went through, as if they had a mishmar. Now, in the Mishnah, there is a discussion of what's called Ashmurat Halayla, that during night there's a watch guard. And each watch guard has to watch the town at night, lest a fire break out or something happen that someone's watching. The person who carry the lantern and say, uh, what is it, 9 o'clock and all is good, or whatever I see in the movies. Well, she said every generation was an ashmura, was a mishmar of the night, and she says this is our mishmar. This is a grievous, horrible time for the Jewish people, but it's our time to, as it were, in this time of darkness, to guard the the moral stamina of Israelis. It was a place called Beit Radical, the radical house. Unabashedly hard left-wing politics, and there were signs up, and great young group of people. I mean, whatever their politics are, idealistic, committed. And then she said, the moderator said, um, uh, Lola read min haaretz. She says, our goal here is don't leave Israel. Israel needs us. We on the left are feeling discouraged. And she says, stay and fight. It's our mishmar. Very beautiful. And the last woman spoke so beautifully that Mirav and Abigail and I just began crying. And the whole room was just subdued at how beautiful. And we asked her, said, could we have a copy of your talk? And we hope to translate it into English, and with her permission, share it with you, because it was really extraordinary. For me, it's the first time, in my tears at the beauty of her talk, it's the first time that I've actually been able to mourn here in Israel, because there's so much acrimony about just about the hostages and Netanyahu and the military, and should they do this and should they do that, and it's just that I here in Israel I have not found that Shiva Minyan, that place just to come and mourn. And for the 5 7 minutes that this woman spoke, I finally felt my own ability just to mourn for a few moments, and it was really exceptional. So, and Mirav and Abigail felt the same thing. In fact, as she was speaking, she said, "I have my little daughter Abigail. We perked up, whom we call Guli. That, of course, that's what we call Abigail. That's her nickname, is Guli." And she said, in some Eastern European language, Guli means heart. And so Abigail went up, and I saw them talking and embracing each other and hugging each other. It was just really, really extraordinary. All right. So at the very end, if anybody has any comments, questions about what's happening in Israel, I'll share with you. But it's just it's a very deep experience here. And as Douglas Murray said, Israel is on the front line of this struggle between Islamist forces, between renewed Russian bellicosity and imperialism, and the fight for the soul of the West, and this is the actual front line, and many Israelis are acutely aware of that they're fighting a war for Israel and a war for Western civilization, and it's happening right here. Okay, so to my studies of Genesis, um, I want to share with you the I think the a couple of the most important thoughts that I've shared. One of them being that whoever wrote these sections that we're studying did not know they were writing the Bible. So when we think of the writings in the Bible, we have the sense that it was written to be in the Bible. Of course, from a non-Orthodox perspective, this is not spoken to Moses by God at Mount Sinai, therefore already purposed to be in the Bible, but rather extraordinary literary creations that were not self-consciously part of the Bible. Um, so I've spoken about Genesis chapter 1, which might have been written by Jeremiah, who was one of those who was producing the first canon, and may have written that, as it were, on commission to introduce creation. But remember, there was no Bible yet, and probably till the time of Ezra, but 400s BCE. But Jeremiah, who lived in the 500s BCE, he was putting the canon together. Apparently, in the his school, already at the end of the time of the kings, uh, knew that the text had to be put together. Why do we know? Because we can see Jeremiah's handprints throughout the editing of the Bible. Now, the narratives that we're in, which began in chapter 2 with God fashioning the human being, the Garden of Eden story, which has a very dark dimension to it. And I've been thinking to myself, what's this doing in the Bible? And it occurred to me, it never was thought of being in the Bible. It's something like a creation narrative in the same tone as Job. That's one thing that's been very clear to me. When you really look into the Garden of Eden story and you look at the depiction of God in Job, they're very similar. No one talks about it because people want Genesis 2 and 3 to be what I call adult education, Hebrew school. It's a moral lesson as opposed to there's a darkness of the divine coming through as it did in the book of Job. And I don't think this was written to be, as it were, in the Bible, but it was put in the Bible. I think all my life, I've ignored the darker dimensions, aside for the past 10 years as I've been unfolding that. And the question is, when one, for example, sees the Garden of Eden as a con game, which I've been developing the past few weeks, and the second most important thing is the idea of shame. It's a con game. So what does the con want? Doesn't want their money. He wants them, as it were, to experience that most awful of human experiences, which is shame. That's what the story is about. They eat from the tree, they realize they're naked, and they run and hide from God. I think there's almost no better concentrated understanding of the idea of shame than that story. The minute you realize there's something shameful about me, that is one thing that brings us into consciousness and might even be something that drives civilization in a Freudian sense. Um, okay, so uh, I, if you're coming back, you're enjoying my helping you read the Bible with no theological lens placed on it. But as much as I can, just teach what the Hebrew says, and it's more brilliant and in some dark way more luminous than we can even imagine. At least that's been my experience. The deeper I read it, the more I'm impressed by its philosophic brilliance, especially the philosophic anthropology of exile, of of uh, of of shame, and the sense that if the figure of God here in some way represents life, reality, that life plays tricks on us. Life sets us up for one thing, delivers another, and then we here who are on the receiving end of the con. Uh, by the way, this was, remember Leonard Cohen's line. He says, "If you're the dealer, I'm out of the game." Well, um, do you want it darker? Uh, there is no getting out of this game. And so when I ask where is God in this dark text, well, you discover God when you know there's something bad happening in the text? How do we know that it's not supposed to be this way? How do you know that this idea that you work so hard for one thing, you're delivered another, life doesn't work out? Because we have an instinctive sense of fairness. We have an instinctive sense of how life ought to be. And then the question is when we read, for example, this Torah portion with the Jacob story, with this wonderful Jan Richardson interpretation, um, we see we have an instinctive understanding of searching for truth and meaning in a world that is sometimes hostile and inhospitable to our searches, but we search and we struggle anyway. So what the story has done for me is put me in the position, nevertheless, that it might be a con game and life can be hostile to us, we stay in the fight. If you're the dealer, I'm not going to make it so easy for you to deal me out of this game. So that's my summary of my attitude toward what we are reading. All right, so we began the Cain and Abel narrative. So just a couple insights there. This startling sentence in the beginning of chapter 1, V'hadam yada et Chava ishto, and the human being knew, and here the sense that we're now, this is the first time, by the way, that the word yada, knowledge, remember we had the tree of knowledge, is used for sexual intercourse. And it's a, you know, again, for the reader of the text, I'm not saying this is in the Hebrew language, but the reader of the text now knows that part of the meaning of the tree of life was not only awareness of one's own nakedness, actually the seemingly the arousal of human sexuality. Um, and it says Vatahar, she became pregnant, Vatelet et Kayin, Kuf Yud Nun, saying Vatomer Kaniti Ish et Adonai. Kaniti ish Adonai. Now, the word kana has two distinctly different meanings in Hebrew. One is to acquire, and one is to create. So, for example, in Genesis chapter 14, God is called Koneh Shamayim Va'aretz, the creator of the heavens and the earth. Uh, Yosh, I assume you have the AI summary going. I can't start it. I don't think I'm the co-host, but I hope it's going. If not, we'll take the recording. We'll run it through AI. These summaries are terrific. In any case, um, but it can't mean I acquired a man because the et, the which introduces a direct object, just makes no sense here. Kaniti ish et Adonai. Now, the word et in some circumstances does not only introduce the direct object, um, but also means with in some places, especially archaic Hebrew. And so, but I acquired an ish with God. It doesn't make sense. So what it has to mean is I created a man with God, which is if there's something called feminist spirituality and the spirituality of pregnancy and childbirth, this mysterious experience that Chava is called the mother of all life, a human life grew within her. And this might be a meditation on this miracle, this divinity of the human being directly participating in the process. God creates the human being. The woman is an agent, as it were, of the creation of yet another human being. So Kayin means creation. That's the meaning of the word. I've talked about where, again, there's another con, there's another setup. Cain, went into the family business. He became a farmer, and Ish Adamah, land, Adam, and he makes an offering to God. God prefers the offering of his brother Hevel, which means vanishing. Remember in Ecclesiastes, Hevel Hevalim, vanity not meaning that vainness, but nothingness, that which will disappear. Um, so Hevel, whose name in a way dooms him, God prefers Hevel's offering, and there doesn't seem to be any purpose to this but to shame Cain. And again, it's disturbing. I read, I thought to myself, am I really having this thought? But Cain, in a way, the experience of his parents is repeated for Cain. We're given no reason. Um, and of course, God says to Cain, why are you upset? And, you know, in my parenting the soul of the child class, I think to myself, this is the worst parenting ever, to set your child up for humiliation and say, why are you upset? And, if the kid has any consciousness, they say, I'd like to kill you. You just humiliated me and you won't even admit. I heard one person said, oh, God was having a personal conversation and attending to kind. I said, not by saying, why are you upset? If you do better, and I can just imagine, this kind of paternalistic giving a little sermon to a child who's been shamed. So the murderous rage builds up in Cain. Of course, he takes the rage, which by the way should be at God for setting this up. He takes it out on his brother, who's named vanishing anyway. So we have the killing of Hevel, and and then the where we ended, uh, and the curse of Cain, that the Adamah will never produce. He was a worker of the land, and the land would never produce for him. That Hevel's blood is saturated into the earth, and it says, you will become a vagrant and a wanderer, according to my Art School translation. Um, Navna tehiyeh ba'aretz. You'll be a vagrant wanderer on the earth. You can't farm. The earth will not respond to you because of what you have spilled blood into the land. Cain says in verse 13 and 14, "This my sin is too much for me to bear. Gerashta oti ayom al pnei ha'ma. You exiled me from the face of the earth," meaning the earth is no longer my friend. I can't farm. Um, Umipanecha esater, and I'll hide from you. Baiti navenad ba'aretz. Vaya kol motzi yahargeni. Anybody who finds me is going to kill me. Now, so what does God do to create some kind of constellation for Cain? Cain says, "Vayomer lo Adonai lachen." Therefore, kol horeg Cain shivatayim yukam. Anybody kills Cain, I'm going to pay him back sevenfold. And the reader says, enough with this killing. We just had a killing right before, and you're going to start killing people seven times over. And so the mark of Cain, as I wrote in my Shabbat thought, has a Janus face, the god of two faces. On one hand, it marks the murderer. On the other hand, don't touch Cain. So the ot, the sign of Cain, you probably see this in literature. On one hand, it can be don't touch this person. They're under God's personal protection. And the other hand is, this is the sign of the person banished from the face of the earth. Two seemingly utterly different meanings in this one thing called the ot Cain. By the way, the first time the word ot is used in the Bible as well. So he's now a vagrant wanderer, and we're going to end here, and I want to segue to the next chapter, whether we study it or not. So then it says, Vayetze Cain milifnei Adonai. So where did Cain go? Away from God. What a strange line, because theoretically, you cannot escape from the divine, but whatever he does, maybe spiritually, morally, he goes from God. Vayeshev be'eretz Nod. He goes to the land of Nod, clearly connected to the term Na v'nad. Nun Daled is wanderer. The land of Nod would be something like the place where the wanderers go. Now, just think of that. All of we who wander upon the earth, there's a place called Nod, which attracts all the wanderers. People who don't fit in, people of the mark of Cain, those who have been banished, they actually have their own place to go. So he goes to the land of Nod. That's a very beautiful, deep metaphor. Where? Kidmat Eden, east of Eden. Yet again, when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, where'd they go? Mikedem, east of Eden. And here we have it again. This is where Cain lives. The person banished from the face of the earth lives Kidmat Eden, east of Eden, in verse 16. Vayada, again, the word yada, just as Adam knew Eve, Cain knows his wife. People say, where did his wife come from? Where we didn't know there's more people. And The response is, yeah, you didn't know because the author didn't tell you yet. Now it's time for you to know this story was being replicated all over the world, right? And we only know about one. You know, his wife came into being probably like other people were being into being. So we have one creation story, apparently not the only creation story, which again is a wonderful thought to think about. What about all the other parallel creation stories so that kind would have a wife? So procreation began. Again, I'm offering a metaphor for your uh, uh, to start uh, your poem in your creative writing class. Where did Cain's wife come from, and what's her story? Vatahar vateled, the same words used with Chava. She became pregnant and she bore at Hanoch. Hebrew speakers, your ears will perk because Hanoch is the root of the Hebrew word lichanech, means to educate. It's also to dedicate, as in dedicate a house. It's the root of the word for Hanukkah, and it is the name of, in English, Enoch. Uh, uh, the name reappears in the next chapter, and Enoch, of course, is the name of the greatest set of intertestamental literature, the books of Enoch, Enoch 1, 2, and 3. I've spoken about them before. They're stupendous, stupendous, very dark Gnostic literature based on not the Hanoch of this chapter, but Hanoch of chapter 5. And if you just want to jump ahead, in 5:23, there's another Hanoch in the next chapter, and I'll tell you about chapter 5 in just a moment. It says in chapter 5, verse 23, it says, Vayhi kol imei Hanoch, all of the days of Hanoch or Enoch, Chamesh v'shishim shana, 365 years. Um, Chamesh v'shishim shana ushalosh me'ot shana. And all right, 365 years. Clearly a reference to the solar calendar. And then it says, Vayit halech Hanoch et Elohim. Here's the word et again, meaning with. Hanoch walked with God. Now remember, Noah walked with God. Hithalech, God said to Avram, Hithalech lifanai, go before me. Well, here's that word lehithalech, to walk about, which is also the word used with God in the Garden of Eden. Remember that God hithalech, walked about in the Garden of Eden, the Ruach Hayom, in the wind or the spirit or the breeze of the day. Well, this is now Chanoch. It says, Vayit halech Chanoch et Elohim. Chanoch walked with Elohim, ve'enenu, and disappeared. Kilakach oto Elohim, because Elohim took him. This is the next chapter. So, the hidden Gnostic mystical tradition wrote an entire literature based on he disappeared because God took him. Took him where? And so the books of Enoch are he was taken and sent on the journey, fighting through 7 levels of hostile upper world beings who hated humanity up until he could find the divine throne. Now, these are dense, poetic, frightening text, and it occurs to me what I can do is give you some commentary on what we're reading, and one commentary might be the commentary on the book on the name Hanoch and how it delivered a stupendous literature, by the way, which John Milton used as his basis for Paradise Lost. It's rather unknown, but if you study Paradise Lost and you study the books of Hanoch, Milton used the book of Enoch as an inspiration for Paradise Lost. Okay? And if we study this, I can show you. It's really stunning to see this comparison. How did John Milton have access to an ancient text that's been buried from history? How did John Milton have access to this text? Well, there's a story, and I can tell you that story. All right, so going back to chapter 4, so he has this child called Hanoch. We don't understand. I mean, dedication, education, something there. um, and then a few more words about the chapter 4. Then it says, "Vayivaled lachanoch et Irad." Irad Yalad et Michuel, and we go here through the generations. Um, until we get to uh, uh, the names of several apparently progenitors of aspects of civilization. So I'll just go to the English here. Um, Ada bort Yaval, he was the first who dwelled in tents and bred cattle. And the name of his brother was Yuval. He was the one who invented the harp and the flute. She actually bore Tubal Cain, who sharpened all cutting implements of copper and iron. So what people remember is this one begot this one begot this one, begot this one. The real meaning of it is here's the beginning of civilization, and all of these names are actually archetypes. There's the archetype of the shepherds, the archetype of the musicians, harp and flute, the archetype of all cutting implements, so the archetype of artisans are all now here descendants of Cain. And then Lemech is born, uh, and Lemech says to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my wives, hear my speech. Um, I have slain a man by my wound and a child because of my bruise. If Cain suffered vengeances at 7 generations, then Lamech 77. So the story of Cain is floating through, and Lamech somehow sees himself as, as an inheritor of this violence of Cain killing his brother. And he says, "Yeah, I also killed somebody because they bruised me." And if the punishment against Cain is Shiva time, is times 7, for me it's going to be times 77. And the reader has a foreboding: is this what's going to happen to humanity? Vengeance 7 times over, 77 times over. So the feeling you get when you read chapter 4 is a sense of, number one, watching humanity flourish with these different archetypes of human productivity. On the other hand, a dread that another archetype, the archetype of Lemech, the archetype of Lemech is murder, vengeance, disproportionate cruelty against other human beings. Of course, we see this finally create the setting for the story of Noah. Um, he knew his wife again. This is Adam knew his wife again. She bore a son and named him Seth or Shet. The Hebrew word Shet means to place. Lasim and Lashet are synonyms. It's as if he's been placed. Not Hevel, who's ephemeral, but Shet is placed. He's permanent. He's going to stay. She named him Shet. And Chava saying, God has provided me another child in place of Hevel because Cain killed him. We never knew what Adam and Eve thought about their son Cain killing his brother Hevel. This is, I think, the only reference to what the parents thought. Years and years later, they have another child, Seth, saying, um, I finally have a child to replace Hevel. And again, it's a kind of a surprise. Adam and Eve's reaction to the murder, we don't know anything about, except we see the continuing grief here. Now, I'll finish chapter 4 with another completely strange verse. Nobody knows what this verse means. Look at your Hebrew translation. Chapter 4, verse 28. It says, I'll read I'm sorry, chapter 4, verse 26. It says the following. It says, Leshet gam hu yulad ben. To Seth was also born a child by Yikra et shmo Enosh. Now, Enosh is a Hebrew word. Maybe the actual root of the Hebrew word ish means a person, but in any case, Enosh in Hebrew has a sense of mortality. You find this in the book of Psalms, so I think that's also here. We say Ma Enosh v'teda ehu. What is Enosh that you would even be mindful of him? And our life is like grass that withers and wilts. And so Enosh has that sense of the withering and wilting human being. We find this introduced in 5 and 426. And then it says, Az huchal likro b'shem Adonai. Az huchal likro b'shem Adonai. So simple meaning, huchal is the verb form taken from the word the hachel, which means to begin or to initiate. Huchal means begun or initiated. People began likro, to call, b'shem Adonai, either to call on the name of God, or be also means by means of. So, for example, when you're using utensils. You don't say I am eating with ani ochel im mazleg with a fork because that means you took the mazleg out to dinner. You say ani ochel bim mazleg. I'm using the fork. So um, bit shem Adonai means they began to call using the name of God or began to call on God. But the Hebrew grammar is Huchal Likro Beshem Adonai. 50-50 to call on the name of God or to somehow make use of the name of God. The first one sounds okay. It could have said Likro Le Shem Adonai to call toward God. It's not what it says. And so if it is Huchal Likro B'Shem Adonai, began to call out using God's name, we go back to the word Huchal, which means initiate, but the word Chol means mundane. Lechalel means to profane or to blaspheme. So does this mean people began to call out God's name or people began to blaspheme God? Right? It can be read either way. In context, because of the darkness of this story, which culminates in the story of Noah, we tend toward something really bad happened where people began to profane God's name. Again, just as an archetypal reading, what happened that God was driven out of their lives, which you might say is just secularity, but by profaning the divine name, like a society set on profaning the divine name. Well, we've seen a few of those societies where their use of the word God is actually blasphemy itself. That's one of the ways I understand our enemies is they use the divine in order to murder, in order to exert cruelty. Well, we have an archetypal text here. Just the last couple of things, if you're reading this, and you remember from Genesis chapter 4 and 5, oh, this is the begot, the begots, the begot. Just skip, end the Cain and Abel story and run over to the Noah story. Something deep happening here because we have an alternate chronology. We had the chronology in chapter 4. The Bible starts over again in chapter 5. So we have a competing narrative. Okay, look at chapter 5. Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the book of the generations of the human being. I don't think the Bible has used the word Sefer before. I'm actually watching a series in Hebrew on Israeli television. I open my television and there's a rabbi giving a history of the notion of book in the Jewish tradition. I said, wow, that's great. I don't think I would this would happen in Sherman Oaks. And it's an Orthodox rabbi, but kind of from a historical perspective. Did they know how to read and write? When did books come to being? What does the word sefer, book, mean? It also has a sense of, lispor means to give an account, actually to count. Did they have scrolls? And, when did the alphabet come into being? And he's using internal biblical evidence. So I've never read the Bible this way. He's a master of the tradition, reading the Bible to figure out when Israelites became literate, when they began to use, to have a written language, when did stories come about and when did books come about? So here we have this is the book, or this is the account of Toldot. Laledet means to bear a child. Toldot means the generating of human beings. Toldot is used as generations, but it also has a sense of the word leholid, to sire a child, laledet, to bear a child. So this is the book of the generations of Adam, the human being. Beyom baro Elohim Adam, in the day of Elohim's creating Adam, bidumut Elohim asa oto, in the image of Elohim he made him. This is a competing Genesis chapter 1. We have an alternative account. Then it says, Zachar unekeva bra'am, he created them, male and female. Does that mean the first Adam was androgynous, or did he create two? Again, the mystery of chapter 1, Genesis chapter 1, chapter 1, around verse 26, is repeated in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. It says, Vayvarechotam, we have that also in the Genesis narrative, Vaikra et Shemam Adam. He called their names Adam. So now we have further evidence that Adam was not the name of the human being. It was the name of Zachar v'Nekeva together. So the human being, both the masculine and the feminine, were named Adam. So now we have another definition of Adam. What does Adam mean? The unity of male and female, right here from chapter 5. Um, Vayikra et Shemam Adam biyom hibaram, on the day he created them. Um, just one last verse from here. Vayihi Adam shloshim umat shana. And the human being was 300 years old. Vayolet bidumuto ketzalmo. Remember that? Created in his image, in his likeness? It's right here. But who's creating in their image and likeness? Is Adam, meaning the man and woman together. Adam, meaning Zachar v'Nekeva, they're a unit. He begot his likeness and image. So it wasn't Elohim who created Adam in his likeness and image. Adam created a being in his likeness and image and named him Seth. And the final child of Adam and Chava in the previous chapter. And so what do we not find here? The story of Cain and Abel, the story of the murder. It's as if the Cain and Abel story has been airbrushed from the text. And I have a thought that, when the compilers of the Bible, who had many traditions to work with, they had the chapter 4 tradition, which included the murder and Lamech saying, oh, he got 7 times, I got 77 times. I'm a public murderer. I'm a well-known mafioso hitman. They said, well, we're going to write another one. We're not going to mention Cain. We're not going to mention Abel. We're not going to mention anything that the end of chapter 4, we're just going to skip all that and we're going to go straight to Seth. So we're whitewash history. And I can imagine the editorial meeting that says, someone says, oh, look, chapter 5 gives a better take on things. Chapter 4 is so dark. And the person says, let's just put them both in. And so, which is the history of humanity? Chapter 4, chapter 5. The editor said, we'll put them both in. And we have another narrative. Now, why do we have another narrative? Okay, I'll give you my opinion. The previous chapter ends at Seth, but whoever came after Seth would be obviously a descendant of Cain. And I remember when I finished, in this close reading, when I finished chapter 4, I thought to myself, so we are all direct descendants of Cain. We're directed descendants of the man who killed his brother. Very unsettling. But when you go to chapter 5, right, Seth is our progenitor afterward, and then we have another generations, which includes Hanoch, the man who was taken and went up to God. Lamech is mentioned. It says Lamech had sons and daughters, and he begot a son. And who's Lamech's son in chapter 5? If you didn't know, yes? Who's Lamech's son in chapter 5? He begot a son, and he called him Noah. Noah is the son of Lamech, the Lamech of chapter 5, not chapter 4. I could give a Dvar Torah on what if they are the same person? What if Lamech the murderer had a change of heart? And he finally has a son and says, I hate the violence that I've been a part of. I have a son, I'm naming him Noah, saying, this one will bring us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, from the ground which God has cursed. Maybe this son will reverse the curse of Adam and Eve, the snake, and Cain. Maybe the whole thing can become undone through this son called Noah, which La Nuach, of course, means to rest. The curse will take a rest. We can regenerate the whole thing. He lives long after begetting Noah. And then when Noah was 500 years old, he begot Shem, Ham, and Yefet, which of course is the generation of humanity in chapter 6, the Noah story. Now, this is a bit tedious, and I thought, well, I'm just going to skip this part because I don't have like a zinger. It's not like one of these great narratives. But what's great about this is, number one, people don't read it because, oh, the begats, forget about it. Let me just jump to the Noah story. Okay. I want you to see that the editors, they wanted to provide a tissue connecting the Cain and Abel story. First one ends with Seth. Another editor saying, we can't leave it there and we have to have a better chronology. So we're going to take out all that terrible stuff that we just read, start with Seth, Lamech is a different person now. It ends with Noah, which sets up the rest of the Bible. But try to imagine the Bible without the story of Cain and Abel. Just think for a minute. Somebody tried to expurgate the Cain and Abel story from the Bible. Chapter 5 is the evidence. They wrote a different narrative. They started with Seth. No Cain and Abel, no murderous Lamech. Hanoch is taken to heaven, right? Try to imagine the Bible without chapter 4. Now, meaning the Bible without the darkness, the Bible without the murder. So, chapter 4, which is clearly one of the darkest chapters in the Bible, with this archetypal Cain and Abel story, which is, I think, shaped Western consciousness forever as a metaphor. You see that this used everywhere. That I can imagine again a debate around the editorial table. Someone says it's too awful. Don't put it in this Bible that we're shaping. This is sometime in the after the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE. My images, they have 40 cartloads of scrolls and they're sorting them out and trying to put them into a narrative. They come across this one, editors sit. Okay, let's leave chapter 4 on the cutting floor. Just use chapter 5. And someone says, this darkness is a part of the human condition. The firstborn human being, Cain, murders his brother. There's a darkness to this divine that we all know is true. We've all, like Job, we've all suffered from the darkness of fate, the darkness of life, the darkness of history, maybe understood as the darkness of the divine. We've all been there. I can imagine I wouldn't be that guy, and I think everybody here. I'm making a case, leave chapter 4 in. Okay, so in my image, there's a vote. It's like the Israeli Supreme Court. There's 15 people. 8 for putting it in, 7 for leaving it out. By one vote, chapter 4 is in the Bible, and our sense of our humanity is in many ways, we readers of the Bible, is shaped by the Cain and Abel story, because in every one of us there is a Cain. I just want to conclude this with this the Jungian idea that the gods live within us, and then the Jewish archetypal psychological idea that all the characters in the Bible live within us. So I want to repeat to you a discussion I had with a Gutta Neshama, a fellow rabbinical student, a woman who had just a beautiful soul. Everybody knew she was better than any of us. We just wish, like when you say such a nice person, people say, Rabbi Finley, you're such a nice man. I said, I'm not. You just don't know the side of me. Don't confuse me with somebody else. Don't confuse me with Miriam. Miriam's a nice person. I can be nice, and sometimes I'm not. So that's Miriam. And so I remember having a discussion with Miriam in the library at Human Union College. And I'm a Jungian, and I've read this, and I had a sense of my own darkness for sure. And I said, we all have darkness. There's a murder lurking in every one of us. And she said, absolutely not. Not everybody, meaning not me. She says, Finley, I know your history. I know, Compton and Linwood Marines. I get what you're working out. That's not my story. Some of us do not have the, as it were, mark of Cain in our souls. I said, I think it's everybody, Miriam. She says, no, it's not. We remain friends. All right. So I stay in LA to finish my doctorate. She moves on to New York to get ordained. And I find out Miriam dropped out of rabbinical school right before ordination. I said, what happened? So I called her. I said, Miriam, what happened? You dropped out of rabbinical school. She said, you're right. I found it. Uh, something happened to me. I don't feel like talking about it. But the mark of Cain rose within me. And she said, so I can't be a rabbi. I said, Miriam, now you can be a rabbi. Can you imagine a rabbi going through the world and not knowing of human darkness, not knowing what we're actually facing as human beings? The darkness within. How can you possibly help another human being, going through an existential crisis and not knowing the darkness, not knowing the rage of Cain? And she said, well, I understand you better now. I really understand you better. She says, but I cannot carry the title rabbi knowing that this is within me. I said, so what are you going to do? She said, I'm going to become an artist. I said, okay, I hope you touch people with your art. So I just want to share with you a real life discussion rooted here. My understanding of archetypal psychology and a person who discovered it later, didn't think it qualified to be a rabbi. In my sense, it now qualified to her to be a rabbi because if you're convinced of your own niceness, do not become clergy. Okay? Because you're going to meet some unnice people and you can't help them if you haven't been there. All right, that's my teaching for this morning. I'm not sure where I'm going next, but I will use this time let's see, I'm getting a notice on my screen. Um, I wanted to wrap up the narrative, take any question about anything that I've taught, but also just convince you that those begots, begots, begots in chapters 4 and 5, they're profound, they're deep, they're worth reading, especially the two different narratives. One tried to airbrush out the Cain and Abel story. The editors left it in. And it's an archetypal understanding of our humanity ever since. And I think a profound addition, uh, 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 a profound element of our archetypal understanding of ourselves is the kind of thing that if you don't think there's a Cain within you, then you haven't discovered your own darkness and depth. All right.